Pencil sharpening, that's not what we're here to do. Huh? Go. I didn't I didn't type IV. I messed it up again. What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Um, Book 7, Chapter IV. Save episodes. These people, my listeners, they're way behind. Way behind. Um, Book IV. Save. There, we did it, we did it, we did it. Welcome to the Henry George Daily Devotional, episode 77. We continue talking about property and land historically considered. We decided that Rome collapsed because they didn't have a land value tax. No land value tax and you will collapse. George writes, in his lectures on history of civilization in Europe, and more elaborately in his lectures on the history of civilization in France, M. Guizot has vividly described the chaos that in Europe succeeded the fall of the Roman Empire, a chaos which, as he says, carried all things in its bosom, and from which the structure of modern society was slowly evolved. It is a picture which cannot be compressed into a few lines. But suffice it to say that the result of this infusion of rude but vigorous life into Romanized society was a disorganization of the German as well as the Roman structures, both a blending and an admixture of the idea of common rights in the soil with the idea of exclusive property, substantially as occurred in those provinces of the Eastern Empire subsequently overrun by the Turks. Okay, so he said it can't be summed up quickly, but let's try to sum it up. Was this fusion in Europe of the uh, common rights in the soil and exclusive property. Okay. The feudal system, which was so readily adopted and so widely spread. Yeah, that's interesting. I guess the Romans, we just talked about these latifundias where they were slaves on plantations effectively on estates. And then we pass into the feudal system, I suppose, which was so readily adopted and so widely spread, was the result of a blending. But underneath and side by side with the feudal system, a more primitive organization based on the common rights of the cultivators took root or revived and has left its traces all over Europe. This primitive organization, which allots equal shares of cultivated ground and the common use of uncultivated ground, excuse me, and which existed in ancient Italy as in Saxon England, has maintained itself beneath absolutism and serfdom in Russia, beneath Muslim oppression in Serbia, and in India has been swept but not entirely destroyed by wave after wave of conquest and century after oppression. We have a misspelling of Serbia. Serbia. Unless it used to be called Servia. And then you begin to wonder if Muslim, I mean, I think that's just an antiquated spelling of Muslim. So maybe that is an antiquated spelling of Serbia. Serbia. It might be how it was spelled, but it was supposed to be pronounced as a B. But that's like the Spanish pronunciation. I don't know the Slav area, whatever. The feudal system, which is not peculiar to Europe but seems to be the natural result of the conquest of a settled country by a race among whom equality and individuality are yet strong, clearly recognized, in theory at least, that the land belongs to society at large, not to the individual. I guess so. Uh, how do I mean, I thought the feudal system's like we have all these serfs and they serve the one person who owns all the land. But maybe that's just as in opposed to the king owning the land, but let's keep going. Rude outcome of an age in which might stood for right as nearly as it ever can, for the idea of right is ineradicable from the human mind. Yeah, that's true. It was I guess there was like people accepted that winning by strength was just or rightful. Like that's how you, I guess, not just saying, well, they did it. It's just de facto. They wanted to link it to. Hmm. The idea of right is ineradicable from the human mind and must in some shape show itself, even in the association of pirates and robbers. Yeah, the pirate code. What did we learn? The feudal system yet admitted in no one the uncontrolled and exclusive right to land. I see. A fief was essentially a trust, and to enjoyment was annexed obligation. Annexed obligation. I see. So, like, there was this obligation of the feudal lord to represent here and serve the people. The sovereign, theoretically the representative of the collective power and rights of the whole people, I see, was in feudal view the only absolute owner of land. And though land was granted to individual possession, yet in its possession were involved duties by which the owner of its revenues was supposed to render back to the commonwealth an equivalent for the benefits from which the delegation of the common right he received. Yeah, the feudal lord, I see. So, yeah, I guess the idea is like, see, everyone's free and equal. They're not slaves, but now we realize that serfs under a feudal lord were basically slaves. And now we look at our society now and we don't think we're even that bad, but we're basically still that bad. In the feudal scheme, the crown lands supported public expenditures, which are now included in the civil list. Church lands defray the cost of public worship and instruction, of the care of the sick and of the destitute, and maintained a class of men who were supposed to be, and no doubt to a great extent were, devoting their lives to purposes of public good. Yeah, it'd be interesting if we had fully combined church and hospital care, church and medical care. Uh, but we don't have that now. Our medical care has lost God. Um, while the military tenures provided for the public defense, in the obligation under which the military tenant lay to bring into the field such and such a force when need should be, as well as in the aid he had to give when the sovereign's eldest son was knighted, his daughter married, or the sovereign himself made prisoner of war, was a rude and inefficient recognition, but still unquestionably a recognition of the fact, obvious to the natural perceptions of all men, that land is not individual but common property. You could see that with a benevolent feudal lord, it could be quite good, where everyone in his domain was given land, and then from each of them, according to how good their land was what was required sort of in taxation, and everyone felt the loyalty to their land, to their lord, so long as the lord distributed that land well and used that taxation to help the people. You know, like if your lord was the Stark family, not the, let's see, what were the Lannisters? Yeah, or the Baratheons, or the Greyjoys. Gotta hand it to G.R.R. Martin. Those are fun names. Tyrell, Baratheon, Tyrell, Lannister, Stark, Greyjoy. I don't know. Yeah. I have not even watched any of the new Game of Thrones. Just thinking about it. Nor yet was the control of the possessor of land allowed to extend beyond his own life, although the principle of inheritance soon displaced the principle of selection, as where power is concentrated it always must. Yet feudal law required that there should always be some representative of a fief, capable of discharging the duties as well as of receiving the benefits, which were annexed to a landed estate. Excuse me. So fief, the fiefdom, fief is just your place, estate of land, sphere of control. So some had to be a representative and capable of discharging the duties as well as receiving the benefits. There were benefits attached to a land estate. And who this should be was not left to individual caprice, but rigorously determined in advance. Hence, wardship, I guess, and other feudal incidents. Wardship is just when you're put under the control of someone. As you know, under the ward of the court. Not sure exactly what wardship. I don't know. I always associate this with somebody being raised by somebody other than their parents, and maybe in the feudal times, you sent your kids to be raised by the feudal lord, or I don't know. We see this, oh yeah, going back Game of Thrones, people would swap their sons and be raised by another feudal lord as their ward, and then go back, but I don't know. The system of primogeniture and its outgrowth, the firstborn child, primogeniture. The entail were in their beginnings not the absurdities they afterward became. The basis of the feudal system was the absolute ownership of the land, an idea which the barbarians readily acquired in the midst of a conquered population to whom it was familiar. But over this, feudalism threw a superior right, and the process of infeudation consisted of bringing individual dominion into subordination to the superior dominion, which represented the larger community or nation. Its units were the landowners, who by virtue of their ownership were absolute lords on their own domains, and who there performed the office of protection which M. Taine has so graphically described, though perhaps with too strong a coloring, in the opening chapter of his Ancient Regime. The work of the feudal system was to bind together these units into nations and to subordinate the power and the rights of the individual lords of land to the power and rights of collective society, as represented by the suzerain or king. Thus, the feudal system, in its rise and development, was a triumph of the idea of the common right to land, changing an absolute tenure into a conditional tenure and imposing particular obligations in return for the privilege of receiving rent. And during the same time, the power of land ownership was trenched, as it were, from below. The tenancy at will of the cultivators of the soil very generally hardening into tenancy by custom, and the rent which the lord could extract from the peasant becoming fixed and certain. Interesting. Forgotten so much of this. And amid the feudal system there remained, or there grew up, communities of cultivators more or less subject to feudal dues, who tilled the soil as common property, and although the lords, where and when they had the power, claimed pretty much all they thought worth claiming, yet the idea of common right was strong enough to attach itself by custom to a considerable part of the land. The commons in feudal ages must have embraced a very large proportion of the area of most European countries, for in France, although the appropriations of these lands by the aristocracy, occasionally checked and rescinded by royal edict, had gone on for some centuries prior to the Revolution, and during the Revolution and First Empire, large distributions and sales were made. The common or communal lands still amount, according to M. de Lavallee, to 4,000,000 hectares, or 9,884,400 acres. The extent of the common land of England during the feudal ages may be inferred from the fact that though enclosures by the landed aristocracy began during the reign of Henry VIII, who wants to guess when Henry VIII was king? I say 1300, 1485. R is reign, right? Yeah, not his birth. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, 57 when he was born. I went too early. It is stated that no less than 7,660,413 acres of common land were enclosed under acts passed between 1710 and 1843, which is before Henry VIII, of which 600,000 acres have been enclosed since 1845. Oh, what am I saying? 14. That's way after. How did I was only looking at these numbers, I guess. Henry VIII was 1485 when he began. Um, and they're saying about almost 8 million acres of land were enclosed between 1710 and 1843, way after Henry VIII, of which 600,000 acres have been enclosed since 1845. And this is being written in 1879, so it's been about, in the last 30 years, 600,000 more acres have been enclosed. And it is estimated that there still remain 2 million acres of common in England, though of course the most worthless parts of the soil. Oof, I don't know if we're going to make it. In addition to these common lands, there existed in France until the Revolution and in parts of Spain until our own day a custom having all the force of law by which cultivated lands, after the harvest had been gathered, became common for purposes of pasturage or travel, until the time had come to use the ground again, and in some places a custom by which anyone had the right to go upon the ground which its owner neglected to cultivate, and there to sow and reap a crop in security. And if he chose to use manure for the first crop, He acquired the right to sow and gather a second crop without let or hindrance from the owner. It is not merely the Swiss Allmend and the Ditmarsh mark. This has to just mean Danish. Ditmarsh. Oh no, wait. I mean, is that Denmark and Sweden right there? This is like Slovenia or not Slovenia or a lot. What is this place? This, this Lithuania. What? Am I totally wrong where I'm guessing? Is it over here? I'm no geoguesser. Where is this place? No, zoom back out. Oh, wow. It's saying it's in Germany? Oh, yeah. Wait, that's what I was saying. That was Denmark and that was Sweden. I was looking in the wrong place. I see. I guess at a time Germany went way up. Wait, but that's not Germany. Unless, or is it saying all the gray? What's the red? I guess so. Ah, the Hanseatic League. Some of the Georges say that the Hanseatic League is Georgisty or interesting. The Servian and Russian village communities, not merely the long ridges. Yeah, it's not merely the Swiss Allmend, the Dithmarsh Mark, the Servian Russian village communities, not merely the long ridges which on English ground, now the exclusive property of individuals, still enable the antiquarian to trace out the great fields in ancient time devoted to the triennial rotation of crops, and in which each villager was annually allotted his plot. Antiquarian is a class in Darkest Dungeon. I guess triennial just means every 3 years. Not merely the document, or for 3 years, I don't know. Not merely the documentary evidence which careful students have within late years drawn from old records, but the very institutions under which modern civilization has developed, which prove the universality and long persistence of the recognition of the common right to the use of soil. That's what we're all about here, trying to say that there's plenty, if not always, instances of development beginning when the soil was free and shared. There still remain in our legal systems survivals that have lost their meaning, that, like the still existing remains of the ancient commons of England, point to this. The doctrine of eminent domain, existing as well in Muhammadan law, which makes the sovereign theoretically the only absolute owner of land, springs from nothing but the recognition of the sovereign as the representative of the collective rights of the people. Yeah, I remember being taught how unjust eminent domain was when I was learning economics in high school. Um, it's an invasion. Primogeniture and entail, which still exist in England. How is entail different? Um, entail, inheritance. What is this? Um, In English common law, fee entail or tailsy in Scots law is a form of trust established by settlement or deed that restricts the sale or inheritance of estates and real property and prevents um, and prevents that property from being sold, devised by will, or otherwise alienated by the tenant in possession. So it causes it to pass automatically by operation of law to an heir determined by the settlement deed. The terms cut fee tail deeds are in contrast to fee simple deeds, um, possessors of which have an unrestricted title to the property and are empowered to bequeath or dispossess as they wish, although they may so too. The alloidial title of a monarch are given by with power of eminent domain. Equivalent legal concepts are formerly existed in many other Scots towns. Most common laws have abolished fee tails, which greatly restrict their use. They survive only for England, Wales, but have been abolished in Scotland, Ireland, and all before. The fee tail allowed a patriarch to perpetuate his bloodline, family name, honor, and armorials in the person of a series of powerful, wealthy male descendants. I don't understand how this is any different than just a will. By keeping his estate intact in the hands of one heir alone in an ideal, indefinite, and pre-ordered chain of succession. Oh, maybe I see. You could like specify it goes to my firstborn, Max Jr., and then I can specify after him it'll go to my secondborn, George Jr., Henry Jr., not Jr., Henry. Um, but what happens? I don't know. I still don't. By keeping his estate intact in the hands of one heir alone, an ideally indefinite and pre-ordered chain of succession. I heard a beep in my headset. Power and family honor would not be dissipated among several male lines, as became the case, for example, in Napoleonic France, which gave each child the legal right to inherit an equal share of patrimony, where formerly great landowning family could be reduced in a few generations to a series of smallholders or peasant farmers. It therefore approaches the true corporation, which is a legal body or person which does not die and consists in. I mean, Isn't how is this different than just saying everything I have just goes to one son? Is it that it has multi-generational power, and I can say that my son, cannot give it to five different people. He has to give it to just his son. Um, Indeed, it's a form of trust. Whilst the individual trustees may die, replacements are appointed and the trust itself continues, ideally indefinitely. In English, almost seamless successions were made from patriarchs to parents, moves of which were often enhanced by baptizing the eldest son and heir with his father's Christian name for several generations. For example, if it is all named Folk, such indefinite, inalienable land holdings were soon seen as restrictive on the optimum productive ability of land, which was often converted to deer parks or pleasure grounds by the wealthy tenant in possession, which was damaging to the nation as a whole. Yes. An entail also had the effect of disallowing illegitimate children from inheriting. How does an entail differ from a will? Um, yeah, I think it's just this multi-generational, it's like a multi-generational will. Oh, we have a Jane Austen question. When first Mr. Bennet had married, economy was held to be perfectly useless, for of course they were to have a son. The son was to join in cutting off the entail as soon as he should be of age, and the widow and younger children would by that means be provided for. So how come it didn't join his father when he came, which would be possible? You could only end the entail if all remaining people who were covered by it were of age and agreed. Entails usually covered 4 generations, including the person who put them into place. So if Mr. Bennett's grandfather put the entail in place, you have grandfather Bennett Gen 1, father Bennett Gen 2, Mr. Bennett Gen 3, and son Bennett Gen 4, who would ultimately inherit the estate outright and be free to renew the entail. God damn, that's so much easier to explain. It's a multi-generational will. Yeah. Yeah, male heirs loved the system. So that's it wasn't just it wasn't that's interesting. It wasn't simply just established law across all of England or all of whichever place. It had to be like renewed by the men that they would only pass their inheritance to their firstborn male. If there was no entail, then I guess, yeah, it would all be split up. Um, cool. Now that we figured that out, I'll finish this paragraph and then I will go on my way. Um, Doctrine of eminent domain still exists, and entail, which still exists in England, which existed in some of the American states 100 years ago, are but distorted forms of what was once an outgrowth of the apprehension of land as common property. The very distinction made in legal terminology between real and personal property is but the survival of a primitive distinction between what was originally looked upon as common property and what from its nature was always considered the peculiar property of the individual. And the greater care and ceremony which are yet required for the transfer of land is but a survival, now meaningless and useless, of the more general and ceremonious consent once required for the transfer of rights which were looked upon not as belonging to any one member, but to every member of a family or tribe. All right, yes, I'm very convinced that a lot of early customs respected the communal ownership of land. Bye bye.